Yo, what up gang? Welcome back to the video. I figured we would go back to back on these kind of in-depth pieces we've been doing. So today I want to cover mixing because we've done a few mixing pieces over the last 2 months, but I haven't really been able to go in depth on every single concept. So today will be a culmination of everything we've been covering over the last 60 days or so. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll get some clarification on a bunch of the topics we've covered, like clipping on the master, the big three, and things of that nature. So not too much in the intro other than hit the first link in the description to grab 7 free kits if you haven't already. It's really dope, and you get to join my newsletter where we can continue to tap in on a deeper level. Also, check out my second channel, bro. I be giving away so much free sauce on there about the marketing end of things, branding, and it's only gonna get better. I promise you. Definitely want to tap in with that. But now let's get into the mixing. All right, so the first thing you're gonna want to do is start with a soft clipper on your master, because brick wall limiting is the sound of modern music. Soft clipping is the sound of modern music. That's just the way it is. If you want it to knock, you're gonna have to do that. But first, let's take a listen to the beat. So that's super hard, and shout out to my boy Ollie Oxen for making that melody. It is super hard. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just go to the master and set this up. Now I'm going to end up setting up this clipper along with the master chain on the pre-master fader. So this is going to end up moving from the master to the fader that we designate as the pre-master. But for now, we can just do it on the master for the sake of demonstration. So the way I'm going to set this up is open up Patcher, and then I'm going to open up a Fruity Soft Clipper, and then I'm going to open up this VST called Blue Cat Gain. And I have an entire video on how and why I do this, and I will link it below, and it should also be appearing as an annotation right now. But for the sake of keeping things moving in this video, I'm not going to actually explain all of that. So this is what everything's going to sound like now that we have the clipper chain set up. And the reason we want to put it on at the beginning is because we want to hear everything that the clipper is actually doing right off the bat, bro. We don't want to like put the clipper on at the end and have to change all our levels, change everything we're doing with the sound, because we don't like the way the clipper has changed the sound, or now it's like obliterating the sound, and we didn't take that into consideration. That video that I linked down below, or the couple of videos that I'll link down below that explain the clipper chain theory specifically, also have some clips from Jason Joshua, who's like a world-renowned mixer, who will explain why we do that as well. So I'm not just saying that. It comes from pretty good advice. It's a pretty good like technical workflow as well. So the only other thing I'm gonna do right now is push the gain into the clipper so that I can get like that desired punch that I want to start with, and then we'll mix based off of that. So again, like I want to kind of get my clipper to sound a certain way and then work off that sound instead of trying to adjust it later when I'm already done with the entire mixing process. All right, so I really like that. We can move on. So the next part of this process is setting up signal flow. And in order to get started with that, first we've got to route all the drums. I already have all the melodies routed, and so that's good to go. And then I'll go ahead and move the 808 next to the bass, because there's going to be a separate bus for all the low end sounds that are not the kick, because the kick and the snare will go in its own bus as well, and you'll see as we progress through this workflow why that is. But first, I'm going to set up the bus for all of the melody sounds. So we're going to route all of those to this track only, and then we'll rename that as melody bus. Then we'll take all the bass sounds, and first we'll move them over, we'll route them to a bus, and then we'll rename this low end bus, right? Then we'll take the kick and then the main snare, or in this case it's a clap, and we'll route those to their own specific track, which will be designated as the heavy drum bus. Then we'll take all the remaining sounds, which are just top line drum sounds and percussion, like a shaker, some hi-hats, some open hats, and things of that nature, and we'll route all of those to its individual bus as well, and we'll name that track top line. Now we can dock all of these to the left just so it's a little bit more organized. And then I'll create one more which will be used for the drum room verb, which is going to basically add like a subtle bit of reverb to our drum sounds, but we'll work with that a little bit later. And then we'll send one more over to dock to the left, and that'll be our pre-master. Or honestly, we could dock that to the right instead, and that'll be our pre-master. Then we'll take all of these buses and route them to our pre-master. And so now that we have the pre-master set up, we can move this patcher stack over to the pre-master, and then I'm going to delete delete it on the master. And then I'm also going to finish up the stacks on my bus and on my pre-master. So first I'm going to add an equalizer to the pre-master and I'm going to name it master. And I love this because in my workflow, I use tonal balance. And the cool thing is that tonal balance can communicate with all the other isotope plugins that are open in your project. So as you can see, it can already open up that master equalizer right there at the bottom. And then we're going to add a couple more equalizers to these buses. So I'm going to add one here for the melody bus and we'll name that as well. And so we'll name all of these so we can see their designations. I won't do any equalization on the heavy drums because I don't like to equalize those together, but I will add one to the main clap because that's something I like to equalize a lot. Then we'll add one to the top line, one to the room verb. And then when we come back to tonal balance on our master, we can see that all of those are populated here. So we can adjust these based on whatever reading tonal balance is giving us, which I'm going to use this special one that I made based off of like some type beats that did really well on all the channels that I posted type beats on over the years. So we'll close that for now, and then we'll move on. So the next part of this is adding effects to our melody. That's what I like to do next in this workflow. And so to start, I'm just going to turn off all of the buses that aren't the melody, and then we'll just let that play for a little bit and we'll begin to work. So to be honest with you, the only thing I ever add to melodies is like EQ, delay, and reverb. If I'm adding anything else like chorus, flanging, distortion, stuff like portal, gross beat, you know, modulation, time manipulation, that's more of like a sound design thing. And that would be kind of a topic for video in and of itself, especially since like this melody's already done. That would be more just like a melody making video than like talking about mixing. Some of the previous few Travis Scott videos that I've done go really in depth on how I would apply effects to melody from the perspective of sound design, so those should be appearing on the screen in annotations and they'll be linked below as well. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely check out those videos. But for this, I do want to really just demonstrate that I usually would add delay and reverb pretty much to just the melody bus. And then if there's like a specific sound that I want to be a little bit more wet or have a specific type of effect, I might go in there and do that. But honestly, I like the way this melody is sounding. It just needs a little bit more of those wet effects on there. So let's move through that workflow. So of course, the first thing I'm going to do is bring in an equalizer under this main one we have for the master. And I'm just going to do some high passing. And then before we move any further, honestly, I'm going to level everything against themselves. So I'm going to bring all these levels down and then start with this piano texture. And then now let's apply our effects based off of this, and then we can hear how it reacts to every other sound we're going to bring in. So now let's add some delay. It's pretty consistent for me. I'll just go to Fruity Delay 2 and add the widen preset. That's sounding nice and wide. And then the next thing I like to do is go to Lux Verb and kind of just tweak that to my liking. And then we can parallel process that just a little bit. And like that little nice tail end that it gives the melody. So if we turn off the effects and just listen for a second, it's like super dry and like really thin. And when we turn that on, it's just more lush and filling up more space. So now we can bring in the rest of the sounds. And if we do need to add more delay or reverb to a specific sound, we can do it from there. If I feel like manipulating a certain sound, we can do that. But again, I kind of like the way everything sounds already. Ollie did a really good job with this melody. So I'm going to pan both of these textures away from each other. Panning is a really dope, subtle way to kind of just give your mix a little bit more vibrancy. Give those a little bit of stereo width too to really accentuate that panning. Now let's bring in this string texture. Now for this bell. So this is something I'd actually like to add a kind of unique effect to, and it's going to be just equalization. There's a sharp artifact that I want to kind of EQ out if I can. And then let's bring in these last two sounds, which is this wah effects and this box. So now let's briefly talk about equalization cascades, and that's basically just a very fancy way of saying that I EQ out low end and high end mud on as many tracks as I can to free up as much space as I can in my mixes. Is this the most necessary thing? No. Do I do it in every mix? No, but I figured I'd share the tip because it can be very valuable on a case-to-case basis, and I want to give you as many helpful things as I possibly can. You can take what you need from this workflow and leave anything you don't want to use. Like, you don't always have to set up signal flow. You don't always have to do a drum room verb, right? You can take whatever you want from this that's valuable for you and that you think is going to make your mixes better, and then just trap with that. Sometimes you're going to want to use the whole workflow. Other times you're not going to want to. It's fine. You know what I'm saying? But that being said, basically the entire process of the equalization cascade basically boils down to using this console EQ and just bringing it down at that 90 hertz cut all the way to 18 decibels, and then just do that for everything. And what that's going to do is subtly free up a lot of your low end space for things like your kick and your 808, right? So I'll do that on like pretty much all my melody sounds, and then on every drum sound that is not the kick or the 808. So I skipped over the bass because I'm not going to do it to the bass, and I'm not going to do it to the kick, so I skipped that too. And I also skipped over the 808, coming back to that main clap, then the hi-hat, accent snares, open hat, and shaker. And we will do a little bit of EQ to the kick as well as the 808, but first we have to get into leveling, and you'll see more about what I mean by that in a second. That being said, now we can get into actually leveling, and this all starts with the big three concept. I touched on it in that video a couple of weeks ago, which will be appearing on the screen now. And the whole reason I'm actually doing this video now is because I wanted to explain all of the mixing concepts we've covered over the last 2 months in an in-depth kind of like work through of everything. So like the clipper was covered in a video previously, big three concept was covered in a video previously, so on and so forth. So today I want to give you a very in-depth demonstration of that. And before we get any further, I should let you know what the big three concept is, and it's that it addresses the three things that are going to be the loudest in your mix or the most present. So it's all the low end, bass, 808, kick. That's like the first element of your big three. The second one is your main snare or main clap. So in this particular beat, it's going to be that clap right there. And then the third thing is your melody. It's going to be the most present, maybe not necessarily the most loud in terms of decibel, especially when it comes to the melody, because melodies have the ability to present as louder at lower decibel ranges because they cover a wider frequency range. So you really want to more so use the phrase more present as opposed to more loud, but let's go ahead and work through it so you can see what I mean. So let's start with the kick, and we'll turn on our buses so we can begin to level everything. So I do actually want that kick to push a little bit past 0, and since it's going to do that, I'm going to drag another clipper chain on there from my Bam for Bam mixer preset, which is basically just the same chain we set up. And then I'm just going to leave that on there without really changing the settings at all. And I do that because I like to clip in cascades. I like to take care of clipping before it gets to that pre-master and before it gets to that master, because I've just noticed it really gives it more of that punch. Cool. Now let's move on to that 808. I want this to be a little bit less loud than my kick, but still pretty damn loud. All right, now let's switch it out for this bass and do the same thing. Awesome. Let's bring back the 808, and now let's start leveling in this clap, which is going to be the second element of our big three, and it's going to be the second loudest thing in our mix. And I like to give my claps just a sprinkle of stereo, so I'll pan it just a little bit to break it out of that mono and then give it just a little bit of stereo. Why? I just kind of like the texture it gives it. There's no real scientific reason. And now that we have all of that leveled, we can bring in the melody. And since all the melodies are in one composite track already, we'll just level the entire bus against the other two elements of our big three. All right, I really like that. So from there, it's really as simple as leveling everything else in, keeping in mind that you want your big three, you need your big three to still be the most present thing. So for example, these perks, you want them to be loud and present and driving the bounce, absolutely, but you don't want them to overpower any of the other three elements. So let's get into it. Now let's bring in that accent snare. Okay, so that's sounding super hard. And now let's go back to the EQ cascade concept for just a second, because I want to clean up this 808 and this kick sound and maybe that bass just a little bit. Let's turn off our top line and just listen to the big three by itself. And maybe let's turn off the melody too. Okay, I'm noticing just a little bit of low end trash on there, so I'm going to use this EQ to lightly shave that off. And this really makes your kicks hit super hard, especially on top of like 808s and the bass, bro. And because that's going to change the sound, as you can see, it increased where it's hitting. It was hitting it like right above 0. Now it's hitting at like 2. So we're going to have to level that just a little. And now we're going to do the same thing for the 808. And we'll probably push it up a little bit more. And that's going to make it sound dope on like bigger speakers, especially in your car. If you're playing it off of some bigs like in the studio, it's going to sound way more dope, bro. It's going to sound way cleaner and less trashy and muddy on that low end. So now let's get the bass cleaned up. The kick is already sitting so much better on the 808 and the bass, bro. That's sounding so clean. Now, before we move on to the step that's gonna really give the beat that punch, let's talk about the drum room verb for just a second, because I want to set that up. And the way I like to do that is to mute all the other buses and just listen to it on the top line to start, bro. So the way we're gonna do that is mute all of those. then send the top line to another track. And so right off the bat, it's gonna make that twice as loud because we're doubling the signal, but then I'm gonna bring in this reverb and switch it to the drum room preset. But the signal still doubled because the dry signal on the reverb is up at 100%. So when I bring that down, now the drum room verb is only going to be playing a wet signal, which is that reverb effect. And I like that a lot, but now I want to kind of shape the sound so that it's a lot tighter. So let's work on that. Dope. And now I'm just gonna pan the whole signal. And then I'm gonna use an EQ on the front so that when I do bring in the kick along with the main clap, it's not adding any reverb to the low end. And then I'll also do that on the top as well. Now let's send the heavy drums there as well and turn them back on. I'm still hearing more reverb on that low end than I would like, so let's fix that. Better, but now that the clap has come in, I'm noticing that it's still a little bit too much tail end on that reverb, so let's tighten it up just a bit more. Excellent. Now let's just level it in, bro. It just gives it that subtle width, bro. Really makes it sound just a little bit more full. We can EQ cascade that as well. Might as well do it to the top line too. That sounding so clean, bro. Okay, now let's talk about the part of this process that's going to give the beat that punching tint, and it's side chaining, brother. And so side chaining is just basically the process of one signal ducking the level of another signal so that the signal that's triggering the ducking sounds more pronounced and clashes less with the signal that's being ducked. And so the way I like to do this is to side chain my heavy drums, so the kick and the main clap, because it just, you know, gives my beats kind of like that pulsation that I really like when I do it with the clap along with the kick. Some people only like to do the kick, and that's fine, but this is how I like to do it when I do side chain. So we're going to take the heavy drum and side chain it to the low end. So we'll right click that and select side chain to this track. So that's set up, and then I'm going to mute the melody for now, and I'm also going to mute the top line and the drum room verb, and I'm going to put the limiter at the top of the chain so that it can side chain everything underneath it. I'm going to go to compressor, and then in this side chain menu, I'm going to select heavy drum bus because we've already set up the side chaining. Now, in order to activate your limiter and the side chain effect, you're going to need to set an amount of ratio. So I just like to start at 2 and then work off of that, and then we can decrease the threshold to actually create that sidechain effect. So now you can hear what's happening. You're hearing that pulsation that's happening on the low end as we adjust that threshold, and the release can control how long that actually lasts. So lower release results in a tighter sidechain effect. Now, the attack controls how long it takes for the sidechain or the compression to actually turn on. So the higher the attack, the later the effect actually comes in. But when you're doing sidechaining like this, you actually want the attack to be as fast as possible. And I like that. That's sounding super clean. So what I'm going to do now is literally just drag this preset over to the top line. Then I'm going to sidechain my heavy drums to the top line. Then I'm going to turn on the top line and listen, and then adjust that limiter. Make sure it's at the top as well. I'm going to send this accent snare straight to the pre-master and then control its output to the pre-master so that there's a part of the signal that's getting sidechained and then there's a part of the signal that's not getting sidechained, and we'll just mix that in using this fader knob. Then we've got to level that snare with all of that considered. Sounding super clean. And then now I'm just gonna add that same top line sidechain to the drum room verb, and then sidechain the heavy drum bus to the drum room verb, which it already is since it's sending a signal. I'm just gonna set up the sidechain on the limiter, and then I'm not gonna tweak this at all. I just want that signal to be able to sidechain that effect as well, so that we get the most clean and pronounced sidechain that we can out of those heavy drums. Yeah. Now I'm going to take that drum room sidechain and add it to the melody, and that's going to be the last thing we sidechain. So let's turn on the melody, turn off some of these other elements to start just so we can hear how pronounced it is on the melody, and then let's get to work. First of all, we've got to sidechain the heavy drums to the melody bus. Probably a little bit less on the ratio. A little bit more on the threshold. And that brings us over to the mastering phase of everything. And like I was saying earlier, I do like to take care of everything on the pre-master when I do get this in depth with the mixing process. And I really like these kinds of videos because it gives me an opportunity to really like lay it all on the floor and see how in depth my mixing process can get. And again, it gives me an opportunity to share as many tips and tricks as I can with you guys, which I love to do. So all that being said, we're going to head over to tonal balance because we already took care of setting up all of our equalizers and stuff at the beginning of the process, which is what's going to make all of this so easy. So we'll take a look at the frequency distribution and then see how we want to adjust that. Okay, so basically it looks like I'm gonna want a little bit more top end and a little bit more mid-range around 500 and maybe just a little bit at like maybe 1800 to 2000, and then maybe find a way to deal with some of that low end compression as well. As we can see, this reading is actually letting us know how compressed the low end is. It's not really too compressed. As long as it's in this middle range, it's fine, but it's pushing a little bit closer to being too compressed. That plus the fact that the reading is giving me above the frequency distribution that's desired indicates that I might want to actually treat that with a little bit of equalization. So let's get into it. Now we could just address this on the master, but I actually like to address it on the buses first. So the first place I'm going to go to add some top end is going to be on the top line. And I like that. I'm getting about as much top end as I want right now. And so now I want to take care of adding the mid-range. So I'm going to go to the melody bus EQ and I'm going to add the mid-range there. It's looking good, it's sounding amazing, and I love it. So next, let's go to the low end and see how we can treat that just a little bit. I don't want to go too extreme with that. I really like it. It's still within the range of not being too compressed. I like it. I like it. Just a little bit of a dip to bring everything under control is good. So now I'm just going to treat everything very slightly with the master EQ, starting with giving it a little bit more top line, a little bit more in the mid range, and I'm going to leave the low end alone, at least on the master. Bro, that is sounding so insanely clean. So now let's open up this free VST DP meter, which I talked about in that video that we covered mastering in. Again, it'll be linked down below in the description. Turn on sync, go to EBU mode, and let's take a look at how it's sounding and hitting in terms of loudness. Bro, I'm satisfied. Between 8 and 7.5, bro, I'm very, very satisfied. And it's hitting super clean. That's all I wanted to see. If it wasn't as loud as I wanted it, I might go to the clipper and see how far I could get without making the entire mix fall apart. And that's why I really like this chain, because when it's set up, you know, I leave the clipper on its default settings. When it's set up correctly, just push the gain a little bit. Now, there's only so much give that the master chain is going to give you before everything starts falling apart. And you do have to take into consideration all the equalization you've done, all the leveling you've already done. But it is a neat little trick, a neat little workflow that you can use at the end of your beat if you do want a little bit of loudness. Like, let's say it was hitting at -11 or -10, I'd probably push it a couple of decibels into the clipper, and I'd be confident enough to do that because of how much space that loudness is going to give me. I would assume it wouldn't start falling apart until it's like at -6 or -5 or something. And even that, if you level it correctly, if you got a solid balanced mix like we have today, you could legitimately push it. Like, you know what, just to see, let's just push it and see what happens. Damn, so it even doubled the amount of decibels. It's not really falling apart. It just sounds loud as hell. It really doesn't start to fall apart until you start approaching like 10. So that's crazy, because you could get it to 5 LUFS and not really have it be falling apart. And that's because of just really solid leveling, really good effects, good equalization, good side chaining, which does give you that extra room for more loudness. It's a solid mix, bro. Job well done today. So let's bring that back to 4. Take one more listen to the final mix. Shit is so clean, bro. This shit is so clean. All right, that's what I've got for you today. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comment section though. And if you made it this far, I want to see something. Comment and like want that emoji, that cancel emoji, or you could use like the person who's doing this, or you could use like an X emoji or whatever. And then next to that, put a robot, right? No bots. That's basically what that means. That means you watched all the way through, you were locked in, you didn't consume this like a fucking bot. I really want to see how many people make it to the end. So cancel emoji, X emoji, person doing this, you know what I'm saying? You know the emoji, and then a robot next to that hoe. I really want to see all the people who got this far. But other than that, again, let me know down in the comment section if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.